Chapter 7, Part 1 of Hilda Wade. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Hilda Wade, A Woman with Tenacity of Purpose by Grant Allen. Chapter 7, Part 1. The episode of the stone that looked about it. Hilda took me back with her to the embryo farm where she had pitched her tent for the moment, a rough, wild place. It lay close to the main road from Salisbury to Chimoio. Setting aside the inevitable rawness and newness of all things Rhodesian, however, the situation itself was not wholly unpicturesque. A ramping rock or tor of granite, which I should judge at a rough guess to extend to an acre in size, sprang abruptly from the brown grass of the upland plain. It rose like a huge boulder. Its summit was crowned by the covered grave of some old Kaffir chief, a rude cairn of big stones under a thatched awning. At the foot of this jagged and cleft rock the farmhouse nestled, four square walls of wattle and daub sheltered by its mass from the sweeping winds of the South African plateau. A stream brought water from a spring close by. In front of the house, rare sight in that thirsty land, spread a garden of flowers. It was an oasis in the desert, but the desert itself stretched grimly all round. I could never quite decide how far the oasis was caused by the water from the spring, and how far by Hilda's presence. "Then you live here?" I cried, gazing round, my voice, I suppose, betraying my latent sense of the unworthiness of the position. "For the present," Hilda answered, smiling. "You know, Hubert, I have no abiding city anywhere till my purpose is fulfilled. I came here because Rhodesia seemed the farthest spot on earth where a white woman just now could safely penetrate, in order to get away from you and Sebastian." "That is an unkind conjunction," I exclaimed, reddening. "But I mean it," she answered with a wayward little nod. "I wanted breathing space to form fresh plans. I wanted to get clear away for a time from all who knew me, and this promised best. But nowadays really one is never safe from intrusion anywhere." "You are cruel, Hilda." "Oh, no, you deserve it. I asked you not to come, and you came in spite of me. I have treated you very nicely under the circumstances, I think. I have behaved like an angel. The question is now, what ought I to do next? You have upset my plans so." "Upset your plans? How?" "Dear Hubert," she turned to me with an indulgent smile, "for a clever man you are really too foolish. Can't you see that you have betrayed my whereabouts to Sebastian? I crept away secretly, like a thief in the night, giving no name or place, and having the world to ransack. He might have found it hard to track me, for he had not your clue of the Basingstoke letter, nor your reason for seeking me. But now that you have followed me openly, with your name blazoned forth in the company's passenger lists, and your traces left plain in hotels and stages across the map of South Africa, why, the spoor is easy. If Sebastian cares to find us, he can follow the scent all through without trouble." "I never thought of that," I cried aghast. She was forbearance itself. "No, I knew you would never think of it. You are a man, you see. I counted that in. I was afraid from the first you would wreck all by following me." I was mutely penitent. "And yet you forgive me, Hilda?" Her eyes beamed tenderness. "To know all is to forgive all," she answered. "I have to remind you of that so often. How can I help forgiving when I know why you came, what spur it was that drove you? But it is the future we have to think of now, not the past, and I must wait and reflect. I have no plan just at present." "What are you doing at this farm?" I gazed round at it dissatisfied. "I board here," Hilda answered, amused at my crestfallen face. "But of course I cannot be idle, so I have found work to do. I ride out on my bicycle to 2 or 3 isolated houses about, and give lessons to children in this desolate place, who would otherwise grow up ignorant. It fills my time, and supplies me with something besides myself to think about." "And what am I to do?" I cried, oppressed with a sudden sense of helplessness. She laughed at me outright. "And is this the first moment that difficulty has occurred to you?" she asked gaily. "You have hurried all the way from London to Rhodesia without the slightest idea of what you mean to do now you have got here." I laughed at myself in turn. "Upon my word, Hilda," I cried, "I set out to find you. Beyond the desire to find you, I had no plan in my head. That was an end in itself. My thoughts went no farther." She gazed at me half saucily. "Then don't you think, sir, the best thing you can do, now you have found me, is to turn back and go home again?" "I am a man," I said promptly, taking a firm stand, "and you are a judge of character. If you really mean to tell me you think that likely, well, I shall have a lower opinion of your insight into men than I have been accustomed to harbor." Her smile was not wholly without a touch of triumph. "In that case," she went on, "I suppose the only alternative is for you to remain here." "That would appear to be logic," I replied. "But what can I do? Set up in practice?" "I don't see much opening," she answered. "If you ask my advice, I should say there is only one thing to be done in Rhodesia just now: turn farmer." "It is done," I answered with my usual impetuosity. "Since you say the word, I am a farmer already. I feel an interest in oats that is simply absorbing. What steps ought I to take first in my present condition?" She looked at me, all brown with the dust of my long ride. "I would suggest," she said slowly, "a good wash and some dinner." "Hilda," I cried, surveying my boots, or what was visible of them, "that is really clever of you. A wash and some dinner. So practical, so timely. The very thing. I will see to it." Before night fell I had arranged everything. I was to buy the next farm from the owner of the one where Hilda lodged. I was also to learn the rudiments of South African agriculture from him for a valuable consideration, and I was to lodge in his house while my own was building. He gave me his views on the cultivation of oats. He gave them at some length, more length than perspicuity. I knew nothing about oats save that they were employed in the manufacture of porridge, which I detest. But I was to be near Hilda once more, and I was prepared to undertake the superintendence of the oat from its birth to its reaping, if only I might be allowed to live so close to Hilda. The farmer and his wife were Boers, but they spoke English. Mr. Jan Willem Klaas himself was a fine specimen of the breed, tall, erect, broad shouldered, and genial. Mrs. Klaas, his wife, was mainly suggestive, in mind and person, of suet pudding. There was one prattling little girl of 3 years old by name Sannie, a most engaging child, and also a chubby baby. "You are betrothed, of course," Mrs. Klaas said to Hilda before me, with the curious tactlessness of her race, when we made our first arrangement. Hilda's face flushed. "No, we are nothing to one another," she answered, which was only true formally. "Dr. Cumberledge had a post at the same hospital in London where I was a nurse, and he thought he would like to try Rhodesia, that is all." Mr. Klaas gazed from one to other of us suspiciously. "You English are strange," she answered with a complacent little shrug, "but dear, from Europe, your ways, we know, are different." Hilda did not attempt to explain. It would have been impossible to make the good soul understand. Her horizon was so simple. She was a harmless housewife, given mostly to dyspepsia and the care of her little one. Hilda had won her heart by unfeigned admiration for the chubby baby. to a mother that covers a multitude of eccentricities, such as one expects to find in an incomprehensible English, Mrs. Claes put up with me because she liked Hilda. We spent some months together on Claes's farm. It was a dreary place, save for Hilda. The bare daub and wattle walls, the clumps of misshapen and dusty prickly pears that girt round the thatched huts of the Kafir workpeople, the stone-penned sheep kraals, and the corrugated iron roof of the bald stable for the wagon oxen, all was crude and ugly as a new country can make things. It seemed to me a desecration that Hilda should live in such an unfinished land. Hilda, whom I imagined as moving by nature through broad English parks with Elizabethan cottages and immemorial oaks. Hilda, whose proper atmosphere seemed to be one of coffee-colored laces, ivy-clad abbeys, lichen-encrusted walls, all that is beautiful and gracious in time-honored civilizations. Nevertheless, we lived on there in a meaningless sort of way. I hardly knew why. To me it was a puzzle. When I asked Hilda, she shook her head with her sibylline air and answered confidentially: "You do not understand Sebastian as well as I do. We have to wait for him. The next move is his. Till he plays his piece, I cannot tell how I may have to checkmate him." So we waited for Sebastian to advance a pawn. Meanwhile, I toyed with South African farming, not very successfully, I must admit. Nature did not design me for growing oats. I am no judge of oxen, and my views on the feeding of Kaffir sheep raised broad smiles on the black faces of my Mashona labourers. I still lodged at Tant Metty's, as everybody called Mrs. Claes. She was courtesy aunt to the community at large, while Jan Willem was its courtesy uncle. They were simple, homely folk, who lived up to their religious principles on an unvaried diet of stewed ox beef and bread. They suffered much from chronic dyspepsia, due in part, at least, no doubt, to the monotony of their food, their life, their interests. One could hardly believe one was still in the 19th century. These people had the calm, the local seclusion of the prehistoric epoch. For them, Europe did not exist. They knew it merely as a place where settlers came from. What the Tsar intended, what the Kaiser designed, never disturbed their rest. A sick ox, a rattling tile on the roof, meant more to their lives than war in Europe. The one break in the sameness of their daily routine was family prayers, the one weekly event, going to church at Salisbury. Still, they had a single enthusiasm. Like everybody else for 50 miles around, they believed profoundly in the future of Rhodesia. When I gazed about me at the raw new land, the weary flat of red soil and brown grasses, I felt at least that, with a present like that, it had need of a future. I am not by disposition a pioneer. I belong instinctively to the old civilizations. In the midst of rudimentary towns and incipient fields, I yearn for grey houses, a Norman church, an English thatched cottage. However, for Hilda's sake I braved it out, and continued to learn the ABC of agriculture on an unmade farm, with great assiduity from Jan Willem. We had been stopping some months at Claes together, when business compelled me one day to ride into Salisbury. I had ordered some goods for my farm from England, which had at last arrived. I had now to arrange for their conveyance from the town to my plot of land, a portentous matter. Just as I was on the point of leaving Claes's, and was tightening the saddle girth on my sturdy little pony, Jan Willem himself sidled up to me with a mysterious air, his broad face all wrinkled with anticipatory pleasure. He placed a sixpence in my palm, glancing about him on every side as he did so, like a conspirator. "What am I to buy with it?" I asked, much puzzled, and suspecting tobacco. Tant Metty declared he smoked too much for a church elder. He put his finger to his lips, nodded, and peered round. "Lollipops for Sanny," he whispered low at last, with a guilty smile. "But," he glanced about him again, "Give them to me, please, when Tant Metty isn't looking." His nod was all mystery. "You may rely on my discretion," I replied, throwing the time honored prejudice of the profession to the winds, and well pleased to aid and abet the simple minded soul in his nefarious designs against little Sannie's digestive apparatus. He patted me on the back. "Peppermint lollipops, mind," he went on in the same solemn undertone. "Sonny likes them best. Peppermint." I put my foot in the stirrup and vaulted into my saddle. "They shall not be forgotten," I answered with a quiet smile at this pretty little evidence of fatherly feeling. I rode off. It was early morning before the heat of the day began. Hilda accompanied me part of the way on her bicycle. She was going to the other young farm, some 8 miles off, across the red brown plateau, where she gave lessons daily to the 10-year-old daughter of an English settler. It was a labor of love, for settlers in Rhodesia cannot afford to pay for what are beautifully described as finishing governesses, but Hilda was of the sort who cannot eat the bread of idleness. She had to justify herself to her kind by finding some work to do which should vindicate her existence. I parted from her at a point on the monotonous plain where one rubbly road branched off from another. Then I jogged on in the full morning sun over that scorching plain of loose red sand all the way to Salisbury. Not a green leaf or a fresh flower anywhere. The eye ached at the hot glare of the reflected sunlight from the sandy level. My business detained me several hours in the half built town, with its flaunting stores and its rough new offices. It was not till towards afternoon that I could get away again on my sorrel, across the blazing plain once more to classes. I moved on over the plateau at an easy trot, full of thoughts of Hilda. What could be the step she expected Sebastian to take next? She did not know herself, she had told me. There her faculty failed her. But some step he would take, and till he took it she must rest and be watchful. I passed the great tree that stands up like an obelisk in the midst of the plain beyond the deserted Matabele village. I passed the low clumps of the dry karoo bushes by the rocky kopje. I passed the fork of the rubbly roads where I had parted from Hilda. At last I reached the long, rolling ridge which looks down upon classes, and could see in the slant sunlight the mud farmhouse and the corrugated iron roof where the oxen were stabled. The place looked more deserted, more dead alive than ever. Not a black boy moved in it. Even the cattle and Kaffe sheep were nowhere to be seen. But then it was always quiet, and perhaps I noticed the obtrusive air of solitude and sleepiness even more than usual, because I had just returned from Salisbury. All things are comparative. After the lost loneliness of Klaas's farm, even brand new Salisbury seemed busy and bustling. I hurried on, ill at ease, but Aunt Mettie would doubtless have a cup of tea ready for me as soon as I arrived, and Hilda would be waiting at the gate to welcome me. I reached the stone enclosure and passed up through the flower garden. To my great surprise, Hilda was not there. As a rule, she came to meet me with her sunny smile, but perhaps she was tired, or the sun on the road might have given her a headache. I dismounted from my mare and called one of the Kaffir boys to take her to the stable. Nobody answered. I called again. Still silence. I tied her up to the post and strode over to the door, astonished at the solitude. I began to feel there was something weird and uncanny about this homecoming. Never before had I known classes so entirely deserted. I lifted the latch and opened the door. It gave access at once to the single plain living room. There all was huddled. For a moment my eyes hardly took in the truth. There are sights so sickening that the brain at the first shock fully fails to realize them. On the stone slab floor of the low living room, Tant Mettie lay dead. Her body was pierced through by innumerable thrusts, which I somehow instinctively recognized as assegai wounds. By her side lay Sannie, the little prattling girl of 3, my constant playmate, whom I had instructed in cat's cradle and taught the tales of Cinderella and Red Riding Hood. My hand grasped the lollipops in my pocket convulsively. She would never need them. Nobody else was about. What had become of Jan Willem and the baby? I wandered out into the yard, sick with the sight I had already seen. There Jan Willem himself lay stretched at full length. A bullet had pierced his left temple. His body was also riddled through with assegai thrusts. I saw at once what this meant, a rising of the Matabele. I had come back from Salisbury, unknowing it, into the midst of a revolt of bloodthirsty savages. Yet, even if I had known, I must still have hurried home with all speed to Classis's to protect Hilda. Hilda! Where was Hilda? A breathless sinking crept over me. I staggered out into the open. It was impossible to say what horror might not have happened. The Matabele might even now be lurking about the kraal, for the bodies were hardly cold. But Hilda, Hilda, whatever came, I must find Hilda. Fortunately, I had my loaded revolver in my belt. Though we had not in the least anticipated this sudden revolt, it broke like a thunderclap from a clear sky. The unsettled state of the country made even women go armed about their daily avocations. I strode on half maddened. Beside the great block of granite which sheltered the farm there rose one of those rocky little hillocks of loose boulders which are locally known in South Africa by the Dutch name of kopjes. I looked about upon it drearily. Its round brown ironstones lay piled irregularly together, almost as if placed there, in some earlier age, by the mighty hands of prehistoric giants. My gaze on it was blank. I was thinking not of it, but of Hilda. Hilda! I called the name aloud. Hilda! 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 As I called, to my immense surprise, one of the smooth round boulders on the hillside seemed slowly to uncurl and to peer about it cautiously. Then it raised itself in the slant sunlight, put a hand to its eyes, and gazed out upon me with a human face for a moment. After that it descended, step by step, among the other stones, with a white object in its arms. As the boulder uncurled and came to life, I was aware by degrees, yes, yes, it was Hilda with Tantmetti's baby. In the fierce joy of that discovery, I rushed forward to her, trembling, and clasped her in my arms. I could find no words but Hilda, Hilda. Are they gone? She asked, staring about her with a terrified air, though still strangely preserving her wonted composure of manner. Who gone? The Matabele? Yes, yes. Did you see them, Hilda? For a moment, with black shields and assegais, all shouting madly. You have been to the house, Hubert? You know what has happened? Yes, yes, I know, a rising. They have massacred the classes. She nodded. I came back on my bicycle, and when I opened the door, found Tantmetti and little Sannie dead. Poor, sweet little Sannie. Jan was lying shot in the yard outside. I saw the cradle overturned, and looked under it for the baby. They did not kill her, perhaps did not notice her. I caught her up in my arms and rushed out to my machine, thinking to make for Salisbury and give the alarm to the men there. One must try to save others, and you were coming, Hubert. Then I heard horses' hoofs, the Matabele returning. They dashed back, mounted, stolen horses from other farms. They have taken poor Jan's, and they have gone on, shouting to murder elsewhere. I flung down my machine among the bushes as they came. I hope they have not seen it. And I crouched here between the boulders, with the baby in my arms, trusting for protection to the color of my dress, which is just like the ironstone. It is a perfect deception, I answered, admiring her instinctive cleverness even then. I never so much as noticed you. No, nor the Matabele either, for all their sharp eyes. They passed by without stopping. I clasped the baby hard and tried to keep it from crying. If it had cried, all would have been lost, but they passed just below and swept on toward Rosenboom's. I lay still for a while, not daring to look out. Then I raised myself wearily and tried to listen. Just at that moment I heard a horse's hoofs ring out once more. I couldn't tell, of course, whether it was you returning or one of the Matabele left behind by the others, so I crouched again. Thank God you are safe, Hubert." All this took a moment to say, or was less said than hinted. "Now, what must we do?" I cried. "Bolt back again to Salisbury?" "It is the only thing possible, if my machine is unhurt. They may have taken it, or ridden over and broken it." End of chapter 7, part 1. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 7, part 2 of Hilda Wade. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Hilda Wade, A Woman with Tenacity of Purpose by Grant Allen. Chapter 7, Part 2. We went down to the spot and picked it up where it lay, half concealed among the brittle, dry scrub of milk bushes. I examined the bearings carefully. Though there were hoof marks close by, it had received no hurt. I blew up the tire, which was somewhat flabby, and went on to untie my sturdy pony. The moment I looked at her, I saw the poor little brute was wearied out with her 2 long rides in the sweltering sun. Her flanks quivered. "It is no use," I cried, patting her as she turned to me with appealing eyes that asked for water. "She can't go back as far as Salisbury, at least till she has had a feed of corn and a drink. Even then it will be rough on her." "Give her bread," Hilda suggested. "That will hearten her more than corn. There is plenty in the house. Tant Mettie baked this morning." I crept in reluctantly to fetch it. I also brought out from the dresser a few raw eggs to break into a tumbler and swallow whole, for Hilda and I needed food almost as sorely as the poor beast herself. There was something gruesome in thus rummaging about for bread and meat in the dead woman's cupboard, while she herself lay there on the floor. But one never realizes how one will act in these great emergencies until they come upon one. Hilda, still calm with unearthly calmness, took a couple of loaves from my hand and began feeding the pony with them. "Go and draw water for her," she said simply, "while I give her the bread. That will save time. Every minute is precious." I did as I was bid, not knowing each moment but that the insurgents would return. When I came back from the spring with the bucket, the mare had demolished the whole 2 loaves and was going on upon some grass, which Hilda had plucked for her. "She hasn't had enough, poor dear," Hilda said, patting her neck. "A couple of loaves are penny buns to her appetite. Let her drink the water while I go in and fetch out the rest of the baking." I hesitated. "You can't go in there again, Hilda," I cried. "Wait and let me do it." Her white face was resolute. "Yes, I can," she answered. "It is a work of necessity, and in works of necessity a woman, I think, should flinch at nothing. Have I not seen already every varied aspect of death at Nathaniel's?" And in she went, undaunted, to that chamber of horrors, still clasping the baby. The pony made short work of the remaining loaves, which she devoured with great zest. As Hilda had predicted, they seemed to hearten her. The food and drink, with the bucket of water dashed on her hoofs, gave her new vigor like wine. We gulped down our eggs in silence. Then I held Hilda's bicycle. She vaulted lightly on to the seat, white and tired as she was, with the baby in her left arm and her right hand on the handlebar. "I must take the baby," I said. She shook her head. "Oh, no, I will not trust her to you." "Hilda, I insist." "And I insist too. It is my place to take her." "But can you ride so?" I asked anxiously. She began to pedal. "Oh, dear, yes. It is quite easy. I shall get there all right, if the Matabele don't burst upon us." Tired as I was with my long day's work, I jumped into my saddle. I saw I should only lose time if I disputed about the baby. My little horse seemed to understand that something grave had occurred, for weary as she must have been, she set out with a will once more over that great red level. Hilda pedaled bravely by my side. The road was bumpy, but she was well accustomed to it. I could have ridden faster than she went, for the baby waited her. Still we rode for dear life. It was a grim experience. All round by this time the horizon was dim with clouds of black smoke, which went up from burning farms and plundered homesteads. The smoke did not rise high, it hung sullenly over the hot plain in long smouldering masses, like the smoke of steamers on foggy days in England. The sun was nearing the horizon. His slant red rays lighted up the red plain, the red sand, the brown red grasses, with a murky spectral glow of crimson. After those red pools of blood, this universal burst of redness appalled one. It seemed as though all nature had conspired in one unholy league with the Matabele. We rode on without a word. The red sky grew redder. "They may have sacked Salisbury," I exclaimed at last, looking out towards the brand new town. "I doubt it," Hilda answered. Her very doubt reassured me. We began to mount a long slope. Hilda pedaled with difficulty. Not a sound was heard save the light fall of my pony's feet on the soft new road, and the shrill cry of the cicalas. Then suddenly we started. What was the noise in our rear? Once, twice it rang out, the loud ping of a rifle. Looking behind us, we saw 8 or 10 mounted Matabele. Stalwart warriors they were, half naked and riding stolen horses. They were coming our way. They had seen us. They were pursuing us. "Put on all speed!" I cried in my agony. "Hilda, can you manage it?" She pedaled with a will, but as we mounted the slope, I saw they were gaining upon us. A few hundred yards were all our start. They had the descent of the opposite hill as yet in their favor. One man, astride on a better horse than the rest, galloped on in front and came within range of us. He had a rifle in his hand. He pointed it twice and covered us. But he did not shoot. Hilda gave a cry of relief. "Don't you see?" she exclaimed. "It is Jan Wilhelm's rifle. That was their last cartridge. They have no more ammunition." I saw she was probably right, for Klaas was out of cartridges, and was waiting for my new stock to arrive from England. If that were correct, they must get near enough to attack us with assegais. They are more dangerous so. I remembered what an old Boer had said to me at Bulawayo. "The Zulu with his assegai is an enemy to be feared. With a gun he is a bungler." We pounded up on the hill. It was deadly work, with those brutes at our heels. The child on Hilda's arm was visibly wearying her. It kept on whining. "Hilda," I cried, "that baby will lose your life. You cannot go on carrying it." She turned to me with a flash of her eyes. "What? You are a man," she broke out, "and you ask a woman to save her life by abandoning a baby. Hubert, you shame me." I felt she was right. If she had been capable of giving it up, she would not have been Hilda. There was but one other way left. "Then you must take the pony," I called out, "and let me have the bicycle." "You couldn't ride it," she called back. "It is a woman's machine, remember." "Yes, I could," I replied without slowing. "It is not much too short, and I can bend my knees a bit. Quick, quick, no words, do as I tell you." She hesitated a second. The child's weight distressed her. "We should lose time in changing," she answered at last, doubtful but still pedaling, though my hand was on the rein ready to pull up the pony. "Not if we manage it right. Obey orders. The moment I say 'halt,' I shall slacken my mare's pace. When you see me leave the saddle, jump off instantly, you, and mount her. I will catch the machine before it falls. Are you ready? Halt, then!" She obeyed the word without 1 second's delay. I slipped off, held the bridle, caught the bicycle, and led it instantaneously. Then I ran beside the pony, bridle in one hand, machine in the other, till Hilda had sprung with a light bound into the stirrup. At that, a little leap, and I mounted the bicycle. It was all done nimbly, in less time than the telling takes, for we are both of us naturally quick in our movements. Hilda rode like a man astride, her short bicycling skirt, unobtrusively divided in front and at the back, made this easily possible. Looking behind me with a hasty glance, I could see that the savages, taken aback, had reined in to deliberate at our unwonted evolution. I feel sure that the novelty of the iron horse, with a woman riding it, played not a little on their superstitious fears. They suspected, no doubt, this was some ingenious new engine of war, devised against them by the unaccountable white man. It might go off unexpectedly in their faces at any moment. Most of them, I observed, as they halted, carried on their backs black oxhide shields, interlaced with white thongs. They were armed with 2 or 3 assegais apiece, and a knobkerrie. Instead of losing time by the change, as it turned out, we had actually gained it. Hilda was able to put on my sorrel to her full pace, which I had not dared to do, for fear of outrunning my companion. The wise little beast, for her part, seemed to rise to the occasion, and to understand that we were pursued, for she stepped out bravely. On the other hand, in spite of the low seat and the short crank of a woman's machine, I could pedal up the slope with more force than Hilda, for I am a practiced hill climber, so that in both ways we gained, besides having momentarily disconcerted and checked the enemy. Their ponies were tired, and they rode them full tilt with savage recklessness, making them canter uphill, and so needlessly fatiguing them. The Matabele indeed are unused to horses, and manage them but ill. It is as foot soldiers, creeping stealthily through bush or long grass, that they are really formidable. Only one of their mounts was tolerably fresh, the one which had once already almost overtaken us. As we neared the top of the slope, Hilda, glancing behind her, exclaimed with a sudden thrill, "He is spurting again, Hubert!" I drew my revolver, and held it in my right hand, using my left for steering. I did not look back. Time was far too precious. I set my teeth hard. "Tell me when he draws near enough for a shot," I said quietly. Hilda only nodded. Being mounted on the mare, she could see behind her more steadily now than I could from the machine, and her eye was trustworthy. As for the baby, rocked by the heave and fall of the pony's withers, it had fallen asleep placidly in the very midst of this terror. After a second I asked once more with bated breath, "Is he gaining?" She looked back. "Yes, gaining." A pause. "And now?" "Still gaining. He is poising an assegai." 10 seconds more passed in breathless suspense. The thud of their horses' hoofs alone told me their nearness. My finger was on the trigger. I awaited the word. "Fire!" she said at last in a calm, unflinching voice. "He is well within distance." I turned half round and leveled as true as I could at the advancing black man. He rode nearly naked, showing all his teeth and brandishing his assegai. The long white feathers stuck upright in his hair gave him a wild and terrifying barbaric aspect. It was difficult to preserve one's balance, keep the way on and shoot, all at the same time, but, spurred by necessity, I somehow did it. I fired 3 shots in quick succession. My first bullet missed, my second knocked the man over, my third grazed the horse. With a ringing shriek the Matabele fell in the road, a black writhing mass. His horse, terrified, dashed back with maddened snorts into the midst of the others. Its plunging disconcerted the whole party for a minute. We did not wait to see the rest. Taking advantage of this momentary diversion in our favor, we rode on at full speed to the top of the slope. I never knew before how hard I could pedal, and began to descend at a dash into the opposite hollow. The sun had set by this time. There is no twilight in those latitudes. It grew dark at once. We could see now, in the plain all round, where black clouds of smoke had rolled before, one lurid red glare of burning houses, mixed with the sullen haze of tawny light from the columns of prairie fire kindled by the insurgents. We made our way still onward across the open plain, without one word, towards Salisbury. The mare was giving out. She strode with a will, but her flanks were white with froth, her breath came short, foam flew from her nostrils. As we mounted the next ridge, still distancing our pursuers, I saw suddenly on its crest, defined against the livid red sky like a silhouette, two more mounted black men. "It is all up, Hilda!" I cried, losing heart at last. "They are on both sides of us now. The mare is spent. We are surrounded." She drew rein and gazed at them. For a moment suspense spoke in all her attitude. Then she burst into a sudden deep sigh of relief. "No, no," she cried. "These are friendlies." "How do you know?" I gasped, but I believed her. "They are looking out this way, with hands shading their eyes against the red glare. They are looking away from Salisbury, in the direction of the attack. They are expecting the enemy. They must be friendlies. See, see, they have caught sight of us." As she spoke, one of the men lifted his rifle and half pointed it. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" I shrieked aloud. "We are English! English!" The men let their rifles drop and rode down towards us. "Who are you?" I cried. They saluted us military fashion. "Matabele Polisa," the leader answered, recognizing me. "You are flying from Klaas's?" "Yes," I answered. "They have murdered Klaas, with his wife and child. Some of them are now following us." The spokesman was a well educated Cape Town negro. "All right, sah," he answered. "I have 40 men here right behind the kopje. Let them come. We can give a good account of them. Ride on straight with the lady to Salisbury." "The Salisbury people know of this rising, then?" I asked. "Yes, sah. Dem know since 5 o'clock. Kaffir boy from Klaas's brought in the news, and a white man escaped from Rosenboom's confirm it. We have pickets all round. You is safe now. You can ride on into Salisbury without fear of the Matabele." I rode on relieved. Mechanically my feet worked to and fro on the pedals. It was a gentle down gradient now towards the town. I had no further need for special exertion. Suddenly Hilda's voice came wafted to me as through a mist. "What are you doing, Hubert? You'll be off in a minute." I started and recovered my balance with difficulty. Then I was aware at once that 1 second before I had all but dropped asleep, dog tired, on the bicycle. Worn out with my long day and with the nervous strain, I began to doze off, with my feet still moving round and round automatically. The moment the anxiety of the chase was relieved, and an easy downgrade gave me a little respite. I kept myself awake even then with difficulty. Riding on through the lurid gloom, we reached Salisbury at last, and found the town already crowded with refugees from the plateau. However, we succeeded in securing 2 rooms at a house in the long street, and were soon sitting down to a much needed supper. As we rested an hour or two later in the ill furnished back room, discussing this sudden turn of affairs with our host and some neighbors, for of course all Salisbury was eager for news from the scene of the massacres, I happened to raise my head, and saw, to my great surprise, a haggard white face peering in at us through the window. It peered round a corner stealthily. It was an ascetic face, very sharp and clear cut. It had a stately profile. The long and wiry grizzled moustache, the deep set hawk like eyes, the acute, intense intellectual features, all were very familiar. So was the outer setting of long white hair, straight and silvery as it fell, and just curled in one wave, like inward sweep, where it turned and rested on the stooping shoulders. But the expression on the face was even stranger than the sudden apparition. It was an expression of keen and poignant disappointment, as of a man whom fate has spoilt of some well planned end, his due by right, which mere chance has evaded. "They say there's a white man at the bottom of all this trouble," our host had been remarking 1 second earlier. The niggers know too much. And where did they get their rifles? People at Rosenboom's believe some black-livered traitor has been stirring up the Matabele for weeks and weeks. An enemy of Rhodesia's, of course, jealous of our advance. A French agent, perhaps, but more likely one of these confounded Transvaal Dutchmen. Depend upon it, it's Kruger's doing." As the words fell from his lips, I saw the face. I gave a quick little start, then recovered my composure. But Hilda noted it. She looked up at me hastily. She was sitting with her back to the window, and therefore, of course, could not see the face itself, which indeed was withdrawn with a hurried movement, yet with a certain strange dignity, almost before I could feel sure of having seen it. Still, she caught my startled expression, and the gleam of surprise and recognition in my eye. She laid one hand upon my arm. "You have seen him?" she asked quietly, almost below her breath. "Seen whom?" "Sebastian." It was useless denying it to her. "Yes, I have seen him," I answered in a confidential aside. "Just now, this moment, at the back of the house, looking in at the window upon us?" "You are right, as always." She drew a deep breath. "He has played his game," she said low to me, in an awed undertone. "I felt sure it was he. I expected him to play, though what piece I knew not. And when I saw those poor dead souls, I was certain he had done it, indirectly done it. The Matabele are his pawns. He wanted to aim a blow at me, and this was the way he chose to aim it." "Do you think he is capable of that?" I cried, for in spite of all I had still a sort of lingering respect for Sebastian. It seemed so reckless, like the worst of anarchists, when he strikes at one head to involve so many irrelevant lives in one common destruction. Hilda's face was like a drowned man's. "To Sebastian," she answered, shuddering, "the end is all. The means are unessential. Who wills the end, wills the means. That is the sum and substance of his philosophy of life. From first to last he has always acted upon it. Did I not tell you once he was a snow-clad volcano?" "Still I am loth to believe," I cried. She interrupted me calmly. "I knew it," she said. "I expected it. Beneath that cold exterior the fires of his life burn fiercely still. I told you we must wait for Sebastian's next move, though I confess, even from him I hardly dreamt of this one. But from the moment when I opened the door on poor Tant Mettie's body, lying there in its red horror, I felt it must be he. And when you started just now, I said to myself in a flash of intuition, 'Sebastian has come. He has come to see how his devil's work has prospered. He sees it has gone wrong, so now he will try to devise some other.'" I thought of the malign expression on that cruel white face as it stared in at the window from the outer gloom, and I felt convinced she was right. She had read her man once more, for it was the desperate, contorted face of one appalled to discover that a great crime attempted, and successfully carried out, has failed by mere accident of its central intention. End of chapter 7, part 2. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 8, part 1 of Hilda Wade. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Hilda Wade, A Woman with Tenacity of Purpose by Grant Allen. Chapter 8, Part 1. The episode of the European with the Kaffir heart. Unfashionable as it is to say so, I am a man of peace. I belong to a profession whose province is to heal, not to destroy. Still, there are times which turn even the most peaceful of us perforce into fighters, times when those we love, those we are bound to protect, stand in danger of their lives, and at moments like that no man can doubt what is his plain duty. The Matabele revolt was one such moment. In a conflict of race we must back our own color. I do not know whether the natives were justified in rising or not. Most likely, yes, for we had stolen their country. But when once they rose, when the security of white women depended upon repelling them, I felt I had no alternative. For Hilda's sake, for the sake of every woman and child in Salisbury and in all Rhodesia, I was bound to bear my part in restoring order. For the immediate future, it is true, we were safe enough in the little town, but we did not know how far the revolt might have spread. We could not tell what had happened at Charter, at Bulawayo, at the outlying stations. The Matabele perhaps had risen in force over the whole vast area which was once Lobengwala's country. If so, their first object would certainly be to cut us off from communication with the main body of English settlers at Bulawayo. "I trust to you, Hilda," I said on the day after the massacre at Classes, "to divine for us where these savages are next likely to attack us." She cooed at the motherless baby, raising one bent finger, and then turned to me with a white smile. "Then you ask too much of me," she answered. "Just think what a correct answer would imply. First, a knowledge of these savages' character. Next, a knowledge of their mode of fighting. Can't you see that only a person who possessed my trick of intuition, and who had also spent years in warfare among the Matabele, would be really able to answer your question?" "And yet such questions have been answered before now by people far less intuitive than you," I went on. "Why, I've read somewhere how, when the war between Napoleon I and the Prussians broke out in 1806, Jomini predicted that the decisive battle of the campaign would be fought near Jena, and near Jena it was fought. Are not you better than many Jominis?" Hilda tickled the baby's cheek. "Smile, then, baby, smile," she said, pouncing one soft finger on a gathering dimple. "And who was your friend Jomini?" "The greatest military critic and tactician of his age," I answered. "One of Napoleon's generals. I fancy he wrote a book, don't you know, a book on war, Des Grandes Opérations Militaires, or something of that sort." "Well, there you are then. That's just it. Your Jomini, or Omini, or whatever you call him, not only understood Napoleon's temperament, but understood war and understood tactics. It was all a question of the lie of the land, and strategy, and so forth. If I had been asked, I could never have answered a quarter as well as Jomini Piccolomini. Could I, baby? Jomini would have been worth a good many me's. There, dear, motherless darling. Why, she crows just as if she hadn't lost all her family." "But, Hilda, we must be serious. I count upon you to help us in this matter. We are still in danger. Even now these Matabele may attack and destroy us." She laid the child on her lap and looked grave. "I know it, Hubert, but I must leave it now to you men. I'm no tactician. Don't take me for one of Napoleon's generals." "Still," I said, "we have not only the Matabele to reckon with. Recollect, there is Sebastian as well. And whether you know your Matabele or not, you at least know your Sebastian." She shuddered. "I know him, yes, I know him. But this case is so difficult. We have Sebastian, complicated by a rabble of savages, whose habits and manners I do not understand. It is that that makes the difficulty." "But Sebastian himself," I urged. "Take him first in isolation." She paused for a full minute, with her chin on her hand, and her elbow on the table. Her brow gathered. "Sebastian?" she repeated. "Sebastian? Ah, there I might guess something. Well, of course, having once begun this attempt, and being definitely committed, as it were, to a policy of killing us, he will go through to the bitter end, no matter how many other lives it may cost. That is Sebastian's method." "You don't think, having once found out that I saw and recognized him, he would consider the game lost and slink away to the coast again?" "Sebastian? Oh, no. That is the absolute antipodes of his type and temperament." "He will never give up because of a temporary check, you think?" "No, never. The man has a will of sheer steel. It may break, but it will not bend. Besides, consider, he is too deeply involved. You have seen him, you know, and he knows you know. You may bring this thing home to him. Then what is his plain policy? Why, to egg on the natives, whose confidence he has somehow gained, into making a further attack, and cutting off all Salisbury. If he had succeeded in getting you and me massacred at Classes, as he hoped, he would no doubt have slunk off to the coast at once, leaving his black dupes to be shot down at leisure by Rhodesia's soldiers." "I see. But having failed in that?" "Then he is bound to go through with it, and kill us if he can, even if he has to kill all Salisbury with us. That, I feel sure, is Sebastian's plan. Whether he can get the Matabele to back him up in it or not is a different matter." "But taking Sebastian himself alone?" "Oh, Sebastian himself alone would naturally say, 'Never mind Bulawayo. Concentrate round Salisbury and kill off all there first. When that is done, then you can move on at your ease and cut them to pieces in Charter and Bulawayo.' You see, he would have no interest in the movement himself, once he had fairly got rid of us here. The Matabele are only the pieces in his game. It is me he wants, not Salisbury. He would clear out of Rhodesia as soon as he had carried his point. But he would have to give some reasonable ground to the Matabele for his first advice, and it seems a reasonable ground to say, 'Don't leave Salisbury in your rear, so as to put yourselves between two fires. Capture the outpost first, that down, march on undistracted to the principal stronghold.'" "Who is no tactician," I murmured half aloud. She laughed. "That's not tactics, Hubert. That's plain common sense, and knowledge of Sebastian. Still, it comes to nothing. The question is not, what would Sebastian wish? It is, could Sebastian persuade these angry black men to accept his guidance?" "Sebastian!" I cried. "Sebastian could persuade the very devil. I know the man's fiery enthusiasm, his contagious eloquence. He thrilled me through, myself, with his electric personality, so that it took me 6 years and your aid to find him out at last. His very abstractness tells. Why, even in this war you may be sure he will be making notes all the time on the healing of wounds in tropical climates, contrasting the African with the European constitution." "Oh, yes, of course. Whatever he does, he will never forget the interests of science. He is true to his lady love, to whomever else he plays false. That is his saving virtue." "And he will talk down the Matabele," I went on, "even if he doesn't know their language. But I suspect he does, for you must remember he was 3 years in South Africa as a young man, on a scientific expedition collecting specimens. He can ride like a trooper, and he knows the country. His masterful ways, his austere face, will cow the natives. Then again he has the air of a prophet, and prophets always stir the Negro. I can imagine with what air he will bid them drive out the intrusive white men who have usurped their land, and draw them flattering pictures of a new Matabele empire about to arise under a new chief, too strong for these gold grubbing, diamond hunting mobs from oversea to meddle with." She reflected once more. "Do you mean to say anything of our suspicions in Salisbury, Hubert?" she asked at last. "It is useless," I answered. "The Salisbury folk believe there is a white man at the bottom of this trouble already. They will try to catch him, that's all that is necessary. If we said it was Sebastian, people would only laugh at us. They must understand Sebastian as you and I understand him before they would think such a move credible. As a rule in life, if you know anything which other people do not know, better keep it to yourself. You will only get laughed at as a fool for telling it." "I think so too. That is why I never say what I suspect or infer from my knowledge of types except to a few who can understand and appreciate. Hubert, if they all arm for the defence of the town, you will stop here, I suppose, to tend the wounded?" Her lips trembled as she spoke, and she gazed at me with a strange wistfulness. "No, dearest," I answered at once, taking her face in my hands. "I shall fight with the rest. Salisbury has more need today of fighters than of healers." "I thought you would," she answered slowly, "and I think you do right." Her face was set white. She played nervously with the baby. "I would not urge you, but I am glad you say so. I want you to stop, yet I could not love you so much if I did not see you ready to play the man at such a crisis." "I shall give in my name with the rest," I answered. "Hubert, it is hard to spare you, hard to send you to such danger. But for one other thing, I am glad you are going. They must take Sebastian alive. They must not kill him." "They will shoot him red handed if they catch him," I answered confidently. "A white man who sides with the blacks in an insurrection." "Then you must see that they do not do it. They must bring him in alive and try him legally, for me, and therefore for you. That is of the first importance." "Why so, Hilda?" "Hubert, you want to marry me." I nodded vehemently. "Well, you know I can only marry you on one condition: that I have succeeded first in clearing my father's memory. Now, the only man living who can clear it is Sebastian. If Sebastian were to be shot, it could never be cleared. And then, law of Medes and Persians, I could never marry you." "But how can you expect Sebastian of all men to clear it, Hilda?" I cried. "He is ready to kill us both, merely to prevent your attempting a revision. Is it likely you can force him to confess his crime, still less induce him to admit it voluntarily?" She placed her hands over her eyes and pressed them hard with the strange prophetic air she often had about her when she gazed into the future. "I know my man," she answered slowly, without uncovering her eyes. "I know how I can do it, if the chance ever comes to me. But the chance must come first. It is hard to find. I lost it once at Nathaniel's. I must not lose it again. If Sebastian is killed, skulking here in Rhodesia, my life's purpose will have failed. I shall not have vindicated my father's good name, and then we can never marry." "So I understand, Hilda. My orders are these: I am to go out and fight for the women and children if possible, that Sebastian shall be made prisoner alive, and on no account to let him be killed in the open." "I give you no orders, Hubert. I tell you how it seems best to me. But if Sebastian is shot dead, then you understand it must be all over between us. I never can marry you until, or unless, I have cleared my father." "Sebastian shall not be shot dead," I cried with my youthful impetuosity. "He shall be brought in alive, though all Salisbury as one man try its best to lynch him." I went out to report myself as a volunteer for service. Within the next few hours the whole town had been put in a state of siege, and all available men armed to oppose the insurgent Matabele. Hasty preparations were made for defence. The ox wagons of settlers were drawn up outside in little circles here and there, so as to form lagers, which acted practically as temporary forts for the protection of the outskirts. In one of these I was posted. With our company were two American scouts, named Coolbrook and Doolittle, irregular fighters whose value in South African campaigns had already been tested in the old Matabele war against Lubengula. Coolbrook in particular was an odd looking creature, a tall, spare man, bodied like a weasel. He was red haired, ferret eyed, and an excellent scout, but scrappier and more inarticulate in his manner of speech than any human being I had ever encountered. His conversation was a series of rapid interjections, jerked out at intervals, and made comprehensible by a running play of gesture and attitude. "Well, yes," he said when I tried to draw him out on the Matabele mode of fighting. "Not on the open, never. Grass, if you like, or bushes. The eyes of them, the eyes!" He leaned eagerly forward as if looking for something. "See here, doctor, I'm telling you. Spots gleaming among the grass, long grass, and armed too. A pair of 'em each, one to throw," he raised his hands as if lancing something, "the other for close fighting. Assegais, you know. That's the name of it. Only the eyes. Creeping, creeping, creeping. No noise. One raised. Wagons drawn up in lager, oxen outspanned in the middle, trekking all day, tired out, dog tired, crawl, 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 hands and knees, might be snakes, a wriggle, men sitting about the campfire, smoking, gleam of their eyes, under the wagons, nearer, 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 then the throwing ones in your midst, shower of them, right and left. Halloa! Stand by, boys! Look up! See 'em swarming, black like ants over the wagons, inside the lager, snatch up rifles, all up, oxen stampeding, men running, blacks sticking 'em like pigs in the back with their assegais. Bad job the whole thing. Don't care for it myself. Very tough uns to fight, if they once break lager." "Then you should never let them get too close quarters," I suggested, catching the general drift of his inarticulate, swift pictures. "You are a square man, you are, doctor. There you touch the spot. Never let 'em get at close quarters. Sentries? Creep past them. Outposts? Crawl between. Had Forbes and Wilson like that. Cut 'em off. Perdition. But Maxims will do it. Maxims. Never let 'em get near. Sweep the ground all round. Derned hard, though, to know just when they're comin'. A night, 2 nights, all clear. Only waste ammunition. Third, they swarm like bees, break lager, all over." This was not exactly an agreeable picture of what we had to expect, the more so as our particular lager happened to have no Maxims. However, we kept a sharp lookout for those gleaming eyes in the long grass of which Colebrook warned us. Their flashing light was the one thing to be seen, at night above all, when the black bodies could crawl unperceived through the tall dry herbage. On our first night out we had no adventures. We watched by turns outside, relieving sentry from time to time, while those of us who slept within the lager slept on the bare ground with our arms beside us. Nobody spoke much, the tension was too great. Every moment we expected an attack of the enemy. Next day news reached us by scouts from all the other lagers. None of them had been attacked. But in all there was a deep, half instinctive belief that the Matabele in force were drawing step by step closer and closer around us. Lo Bengula's old impis, or native regiments, had gathered together once more under their own indunas, men trained and drilled in all the arts and ruses of savage warfare. On their own ground, and among their native scrub, those rude strategists are formidable. They know the country and how to fight in it. We had nothing to oppose to them but a handful of the new Matabele land police, an old regular soldier or two, and a raw crowd of volunteers, most of whom, like myself, had never before really handled a rifle. That afternoon the major in command decided to send out the 2 American scouts to scour the grass and discover, if possible, how near our lines the Matabele had penetrated. I begged hard to be permitted to accompany them. I wanted, if I could, to get evidence against Sebastian, or at least to learn whether he was still directing and assisting the enemy. At first the scouts laughed at my request, but when I told them privately that I believed I had a clue against the white traitor who had caused the revolt, and that I wished to identify him, they changed their tone, and began to think there might be something in it. "Experience?" Colebrook asked in his brief shorthand of speech, running his ferret eyes over me. "None," I answered, "but a noiseless tread, and a capacity for crawling through holes in hedges which may perhaps be useful." He glanced inquiry at Doolittle, who was a shorter and stouter man with the knack of getting over obstacles by sheer forcefulness. "Hands and knees," he said abruptly in the imperative mood, pointing to a clump of dry grass with thorny bushes ringed about it. I went down on my hands and knees, and threaded my way through the long grasses and matted boughs as noiselessly as I could. The two old hands watched me. When I emerged several yards off, much to their surprise, Colebrook turned to Doolittle. "Might answer," he said curtly. "Major says, choose your own men. Anyhow, if they catch him, nobody's fault but his. Wants to go? We'll do it." We set out through the long grass together, walking erect at first, till we had got some distance from the laager, and then, creeping as the Matabele themselves creep, without displacing the grass flowers, for a mere wave on top would have betrayed us at once to the quick eyes of those observant savages. We crept on for a mile or so. At last Colebrook turned to me, one finger on his lips. His ferret eyes gleamed. We were approaching a wooded hill, all interspersed with boulders. "Kaffirs here," he whispered low, as if he knew by instinct. How he knew, I cannot tell. He seemed almost to scent them. End of chapter 8, part 1, read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 8, Part 2 of Hilda Wade. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Hilda Wade, A Woman with Tenacity of Purpose by Grant Allen. Chapter 8, Part 2. We stole on farther, going more furtively than ever now. I could notice by this time that there were wagons in front, and could hear men speaking in them. I wanted to proceed, but Colebrook held up one warning hand. "Won't do," he said shortly in a low tone. "Only myself. Danger ahead. Stop here and wait for me." Doolittle and myself waited. Colebrook kept on cautiously, squirming his long body in sinuous waves, like a lizard's, through the grass, and was soon lost to us. No snake could have been lither. We waited with ears intent. 1 minute, 2 minutes, many minutes passed. We could catch the voices of the Kaffirs in the bush all round. They were speaking freely, but what they said I did not know, as I had picked up only a very few words of the Matabele language. It seemed hours while we waited, still as mice in our ambush, and alert. I began to think Colebrook must have been lost or killed, so long was he gone, and that we must return without him. At last we leaned forward, a muffled movement in the grass ahead, a slight wave at the base. Then it divided below, bit by bit, while the tops remained stationary. A weasel-like body slank noiselessly through. Finger on lips once more, Colebrook glided beside us. We turned and crawled back, stifling our very pulses. For many minutes none of us spoke, but we heard in our rear a loud cry and a shaking of assegais. The Kaffirs behind us were yelling frightfully. They must have suspected something, seen some movement in the tufted heads of grass, for they spread abroad shouting. We halted, holding our breath. After a time, however, the noise died down. They were moving another way. We crept on again stealthily. When at last, after many minutes, we found ourselves beyond the sheltering belt of brushwood, we ventured to rise and speak. "Well," I asked of Colebrook, "did you discover anything?" He nodded assent. "Couldn't see him," he said shortly, "but he's there right enough. White man. Heard him talk of him." "What did they say?" I asked eagerly. Said he had a white skin, but his heart was a Kafir's. Great Induna, leader of many impis, prophet, wise weather doctor, friend of old Moselekatses. Destroy the white men from over the big water. Restore the land to the Matabele. Kill all in Salisbury, especially the white women, witches, all witches. They give charms to the men, cook lions' hearts for them, make them brave with love drinks." "They said that?" I exclaimed, taken aback. "Kill all the white women?" "Yes, kill all, white witches every one, the young ones worst. Word of the great Induna." "And you could not see him?" "Crept near wagons, close. Fellow himself inside. Heard his voice. Spoke English with a little Matabele. Kaffir boy who was servant at the mission interpreted." "What sort of voice? Like this?" And I imitated Sebastian's cold, clear-cut tone as well as I was able. "The man, that's him, doctor. You've got him down to the ground. The very voice. Heard him giving orders." That settled the question. I was certain of it now. Sebastian was with the insurgents. We made our way back to our laager, flung ourselves down and slept a little on the ground before taking our turn in the fatigues of the night watch. Our horses were loosely tied, ready for any sudden alarm. About midnight we three were sitting with others about the fire, talking low to one another. All at once Doolittle sprang up, alert and eager. "Look out, boys!" he cried, pointing his hands under the wagons. "What's wriggling in the grass there?" I looked and saw nothing. Our sentries were posted outside, about 100 yards apart, walking up and down till they met and exchanging "All's well" aloud at each meeting. "They should have been stationary," one of our scouts exclaimed, looking out at them. "It's easier for the Matabele to see them so, when they walk up and down, moving against the sky. The Major ought to have posted them where it wouldn't have been so simple for a Kaffir to see them and creep in between them." "Too late now, boys," Colebrook burst out, with a rare effort of articulateness. "Call back the sentries, Major. The blacks have broken line. Hold there! They're in upon us." Even as he spoke, I followed his eager pointing hand with my eyes, and just descried among the grass two gleaming objects seen under the hollow of one of the wagons. Two, then two, then two again, and behind whole pairs of them. They looked like twin stars, but they were eyes, black eyes, reflecting the starlight and the red glare of the campfire. They crept on tortuously in serpentine curves through the long dry grasses. I could feel, rather than see, that they were Matabele crawling prone on their bellies, and trailing their snake-like way between the dark jungle. Quick as thought I raised my rifle, and blazed away at the foremost. So did several others. But the Major shouted angrily, "Who fired? Don't shoot, boys, till you hear the word of command. Back sentries to laager. Not a shot till they're safe inside. You'll hit your own people." Almost before he said it, the sentries started back. The Matabele, crouching on hands and knees in the long grass, had passed between them unseen. A wild moment followed. I can hardly describe it. The whole thing was so new to me, and took place so quickly. Hordes of black human ants seemed to surge up all at once, over and under the wagons. Assegais whizzed through the air or gleamed brandished around one. Our men fell back to the center of the laager and formed themselves hastily under the Major's orders. Then a pause, a deadly fire. Once, twice, thrice we volleyed. The Matabele fell by dozens, but they came on by hundreds. As fast as we fired and moved down one swarm, fresh swarms seemed to spring from the earth and stream over the wagons. Others appeared to grow up almost beneath our feet as they wormed their way on their faces along the ground between the wheels, squirmed into the circle, and then rose suddenly erect and naked in front of us. Meanwhile they yelled and shouted, clashing their spears and shields. The oxen bellowed, the rifles volleyed. It was a pandemonium of sound in an orgy of gloom, darkness, lurid flame, blood, wounds, death, horror. Yet in the midst of all this hubbub I could not help admiring the cool military calm and self control of our Major. His voice rose clear above the confused tumult. "Steady, boys, steady! Don't fire at random. Pick each your likeliest man and aim at him deliberately. That's right. Easy, easy. Shoot at leisure, and don't waste ammunition." He stood as if he were on parade in the midst of this palpitating turmoil of savages. Some of us, encouraged by his example, mounted the wagons, and shot from the tops at our approaching assailants. How long the hurly-burly went on I cannot say. We fired, 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 and Kaffirs fell like sheep. Yet more Kaffirs rose fresh from the long grass to replace them. They swarmed with greater ease now over the covered wagons, across the mangled and writhing bodies of their fellows, for the dead outside made an inclined plane for the living to mount by. But the enemy were getting less numerous, I thought, and less anxious to fight. The steady fire told on them. By and by, with a little halt, for the first time they wavered. All our men now mounted the wagons and began to fire on them in regular volleys as they came up. The evil effects of the surprise were gone by this time. We were acting with coolness and obeying orders, but several of our people dropped close beside me, pierced through with assegais. All at once, as if a panic had burst over them, the Matabele with one mind stopped dead short in their advance and ceased fighting. Till that moment no number of deaths seemed to make any difference to them. Men fell, disabled, others sprang up from the ground by magic, but now of a sudden their courage flagged, they faltered, gave way, broke and shambled in a body. At last as one man they turned and fled. Many of them leapt up with a loud cry from the long grass where they were skulking, flung away their big shields with their white thongs interlaced, and ran for dear life, black crouching figures, through the dense dry jungle. They held their assegais still, but did not dare to use them. It was a flight, pell-mell, and the devil take the hindmost. Not until then had I leisure to think and to realize my position. This was the first and only time I had ever seen a battle. I'm a bit of a coward, I believe, like most other men, though I have courage enough to confess it, and I expected to find myself terribly afraid when it came to fighting. Instead of that, to my immense surprise, once the Matabele had swarmed over the laager, and were upon us in their thousands, I had no time to be frightened. The absolute necessity for keeping cool, for loading and reloading, for aiming and firing, for beating them off at close quarters, all this so occupied one's mind, and still more one's hands, that one couldn't find room for any personal terrors. "They are breaking over there. They will overpower us yonder. They are faltering now." Those thoughts were so uppermost in one's head, and one's arms were so alert, that only after the enemy gave way and began to run at full pelt, could a man find breathing space to think of his own safety. Then the thought occurred to me, I have been through my first fight and come out of it alive, after all. I was a deal less afraid than I expected. That took but a second, however. Next instant, awaking to the altered circumstances, we were after them at full speed, accompanying them on their way back to their kraals in the uplands, with a running fire as a farewell attention. As we broke laager in pursuit of them, by the uncertain starlight we saw a sight which made us boil with indignation. A mounted man turned and fled before them. He seemed their leader, unseen till then. He was dressed like a European, tall, thin, unbending, in a greyish white suit. He rode a good horse, and sat it well. His air was commanding, even as he turned and fled in the general rout from that lost battle. I seized Colebrook's arm, almost speechless with anger. "The white man!" I cried. "The traitor!" He did not answer a word, but with a set face of white rage, loosed his horse from where it was tethered among the wagons. At the same moment I loosed mine. So did Doolittle. Quick as thought, but silently, we led them out all three where the laager was broken. I clutched my mare's mane and sprang to the stirrup to pursue our enemy. My sorrel bounded off like a bird. The fugitive had a good 2 minutes' start of us, but our horses were fresh, while his had probably been ridden all day. I patted my pony's neck. She responded with a ringing neigh of joy. We tore after the outlaw, all three of us abreast. I felt a sort of fierce delight in the reaction after the fighting. Our ponies galloped wildly over the plain. We burst out into the night, never heeding the Matabele whom we passed on the open in panic-stricken retreat. I noticed that many of them in their terror had even flung away their shields and their assegais. It was a mad chase across the dark veldt, we three, neck to neck, against that one desperate runaway. We rode all we knew. I dug my heels into my sorrel's flanks, and she responded bravely. The tables were turned now on our traitor since the afternoon of the massacre. He was the pursued, and we were the pursuers. We felt we must run him down and punish him for his treachery. At a breakneck pace we stumbled over low bushes, we grazed big boulders, we rolled down the sides of steep ravines, but we kept him in sight all the time, dim and black against the starry sky. Slowly, slowly, yes, yes, we gained upon him. My pony led now. The mysterious white man rode and rode, head bent, neck forward, but never looked behind him. Bit by bit we lessened the distance between us. As we drew near him at last, Doolittle called out to me in a warning voice, "Take care, doctor! Have your revolvers ready! He's driven to bay now. As we approach he'll fire at us." Then it came home to me in a flash. I felt the truth of it. "He dare not fire!" I cried. "He dare not turn towards us! He cannot show his face. If he did, we might recognize him." On we rode, still gaining. "Now, now," I cried, "we shall catch him." Even as I leaned forward to seize his rein, the fugitive, without checking his horse, without turning his head, drew his revolver from his belt, and, raising his hand, fired behind him at random. He fired towards us on the chance. The bullet whizzed past my ear, not hitting anyone. We scattered right and left, still galloping free and strong. We did not return his fire, as I had told the others of my desire to take him alive. We might have shot his horse, but the risk of hitting the rider, coupled with the confidence we felt of eventually hunting him to earth, restrained us. It was the great mistake we made. He had gained a little by his shots, but we soon caught it up. "Once more," I said, "we are on him." A minute later we were pulled up short before an impenetrable thicket of prickly shrubs, through which I saw at once it would have been quite impossible to urge our staggering horses. The other man, of course, reached it before us, with his mare's last breath. He must have been making for it, indeed, of set purpose, for the second he arrived at the edge of the thicket he slipped off his tired pony and seemed to dive into the bush as a swimmer dives off a rock into the water. "We have him now!" I cried in a voice of triumph, and Colebrook echoed, "We have him!" We sprang down quickly. "Take him alive if you can!" I exclaimed, remembering Hilda's advice. "Let us find out who he is, and have him properly tried and hanged at Bulawayo. Don't give him a soldier's death. All he deserves is a murderer's." "You stop here," Colebrook said briefly, flinging his bridle to Doolittle to hold. "Doctor and I follow him. Thick bush. Knows the way of it. Revolvers ready." I handed my sorrel to Doolittle. He stopped behind, holding the three foam bespattered and panting horses, while Colebrook and I dived after our fugitive into the matted bushes. The thicket, as I have said, was impenetrable above, but it was burrowed at its base by overgrown runs of some wild animal, not, I think, a very large one. They were just like the runs which rabbits make among gorse and heather, only on a bigger scale, bigger even than a fox's or a badger's. By crouching and bending our backs we could crawl through them with difficulty into the scrubby tangle. It was hard work creeping. The runs divided soon. Coolbrook felt with his hands on the ground. "I can make out the spoor," he muttered after a minute. "He's gone on this way." We tracked him a little distance in, crawling at times, and rising now and again where the runs opened out on to the air for a moment. The spoor was doubtful and the tunnels tortuous. I felt the ground from time to time, but could not be sure of the tracks with my fingers. I was not a trained scout like Colebrooke or Doolittle. We wriggled deeper into the tangle. Something stirred once or twice. It was not far from me. I was uncertain whether it was him, Sebastian, or a Kaffir earth hog, the animal which seemed likeliest to have made the burrows. Was he going to elude us even now? Would he turn upon us with a knife? If so, could we hold him? At last, when we had pushed our way some distance in, we heard a wild cry from outside. It was Doolittle's voice. "Quick, quick, out again! The man will escape! He has come back on his tracks and rounded." I saw our mistake at once. We had left our companion out there alone, rendered helpless by the care of all three horses. Colebrooke said never a word. He was a man of action. He turned with instinctive haste, and followed our spoor back again with his hands and knees to the opening in the thicket by which we had first entered. Before we could reach it, however, two shots rang out clear in the direction where we had left poor Doolittle and the horses. Then a sharp cry broke the stillness, the cry of a wounded man. We redoubled our pace. We knew we were outwitted. When we reached the open, we saw at once by the uncertain light what had happened. The fugitive was riding away on my own little sorrel, riding for dear life, not back the way we came from Salisbury, but sideways across the veldt towards Chimoio and the Portuguese seaports. The other two horses, riderless and terrified, were scampering with loose heels over the dark plain. Doolittle was not to be seen. He lay a black lump among the black bushes about him. We looked around for him and found him. He was severely, I may even say dangerously wounded. The bullet had lodged in his right side. We had to catch our two horses and ride them back with our wounded man, leading the fugitive's mare in tow, all blown and breathless. I stuck to the fugitive's mare. It was the one clue we had now against him. But Sebastian, if it was Sebastian, had ridden off scot-free. I understood his game at a glance. He had got the better of us once more. He would make for the coast by the nearest road, give himself out as a settler escaped from the massacre, and catch the next ship for England or the Cape. Now this coup had failed him. Doolittle had not seen the traitor's face. The man rose from the bush, he said, shot him, seized the pony, and rode off in a second, with ruthless haste. He was tall and thin, but erect. That was all the wounded scout could tell us about his assailant. And that was not enough to identify Sebastian. All danger was over. We rode back to Salisbury. The first words Hilda said when she saw me were, "Well, he has got away from you." "Yes. How did you know?" "I read it in your step, but I guessed as much before. He is so very keen, and you started too confident." End of chapter 8, part 2. Read by Lars Rolander. Chapter 9, part 1 of Hilda Wade. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Hilda Wade, A Woman with Tenacity of Purpose by Grant Allen. Chapter 9, Part 1. The episode of the lady who was very exclusive. The Matabele revolt gave Hilda a prejudice against Rhodesia. I will confess that I shared it. I may be hard to please, but it somehow sets one against a country, when one comes home from a ride, to find all the other occupants of the house one lives in massacred. So Hilda decided to leave South Africa. By an odd coincidence, I also decided on the same day to change my residence. Hilda's movements and mine, indeed, coincided curiously. The moment I learned she was going anywhere, I discovered in a flash that I happened to be going there too. I commend this strange case of parallel thought and action to the consideration of the Society for Psychical Research. So I sold my farm, and had done with Rhodesia. A country with a future is very well in its way, but I am quite Ibsenish in my preference for a country with a past. Oddly enough, I had no difficulty in getting rid of my white elephant of a farm. People seem to believe in Rhodesia none the less firmly because of this slight disturbance. They treated massacres as necessary incidents in the early history of a colony with a future, and I do not deny that native risings add picturesqueness, but I prefer to take them in a literary form. "You will go home, of course?" I said to Hilda, when we came to talk it all over. She shook her head. "To England? Oh, no! I must pursue my plan. Sebastian will have gone home. He expects me to follow." "And why don't you?" "Because he expects it. You see, he is a good judge of character. He will naturally infer, from what he knows of my temperament, that after this experience I shall want to get back to England and safety. So I should, if it were not that I know he will expect it. As it is, I must go elsewhere. I must draw him after me." "Where?" "Why do you ask, Hubert?" "Because I want to know where I am going myself. Wherever you go, I have reason to believe I shall find that I happen to be going also." She rested her little chin on her hand and reflected a minute. "Does it occur to you," she asked at last, "that people have tongues? If you go on following me like this, they will really begin to talk about us." "Now, upon my word, Hilda," I cried, "that is the very first time I have ever known you show a woman's want of logic. I do not propose to follow you. I propose to happen to be traveling by the same steamer. I ask you to marry me. You won't. You admit you are fond of me, yet you tell me not to come with you. It is I who suggest a course which would prevent people from chattering, by the simple device of a wedding. It is you who refuse, and then you turn upon me like this. Admit that you are unreasonable." "My dear Hubert, have I ever denied that I was a woman?" "Besides," I went on, ignoring her delicious smile, "I don't intend to follow you. I expect, on the contrary, to find myself beside you. When I know where you are going, I shall accidentally turn up on the same steamer. Accidents will happen. Nobody can prevent coincidences from occurring. You may marry me, or you may not. But if you don't marry me, you can't expect to curtail my liberty of action, can you? You had better know the worst at once. If you won't take me, you must count upon finding me at your elbow all the world over, till the moment comes when you choose to accept me." "Dear Hubert, I am ruining your life." "An excellent reason, then, for taking my advice and marrying me instantly. But you wander from the question. Where are you going? That is the issue now before the House. You persist in evading it." She smiled and came back to earth. "Oh, if you must know, to India, by the east coast, changing steamers at Aden." "Extraordinary!" I cried. "Do you know, Hilda, as luck will have it, I also shall be on my way to Bombay by the very same steamer." "But you don't know what steamer it is." "No matter. That only makes the coincidence all the odder. Whatever the name of the ship may be, when you get on board, I have a presentiment that you will be surprised to find me there." She looked up at me with a gathering film in her eyes. "Hubert, you are irrepressible." "I am, my dear child, so you may as well spare yourself the needless trouble of trying to repress me. If you rub a piece of iron on a lodestone, it becomes magnetic. So I think I must have begun to acquire some part of Hilda's own prophetic strain, for sure enough, a few weeks later, we both of us found ourselves on the German East African steamer Kaiser Wilhelm, on our way to Aden, exactly as I had predicted, which goes to prove that there is really something after all in presentiments. "Since you persist in accompanying me," Hilda said to me as we sat in our chairs on deck the first evening out, "I see what I must do. I must invent some plausible and ostensible reason for our traveling together." "We are not traveling together," I answered. "We are traveling by the same steamer, that is all, exactly like the rest of our fellow passengers. I decline to be dragged into this imaginary partnership." "Now do be serious, Hubert. I am going to invent an object in life for us." "What object?" "How can I tell yet? I must wait and see what turns up. When we transship at Aden, and find out what people are going on to Bombay with us, I shall probably discover some nice married lady to whom I can attach myself." "And am I to attach myself to her too?" "My dear boy, I never asked you to come. You came unbidden. You must manage for yourself as best you may. But I leave much to the chapter of accidents. We never know what will turn up, till it turns up in the end. Everything comes at last, you know, to him that waits." "And yet," I put in with a meditative air, "I have never observed that waiters are so much better off than the rest of the community. They seem to me—" "Don't talk nonsense. It is you who are wandering from the question now. Please return to it." I returned at once. "So I am to depend on what turns up?" "Yes, leave that to me. When we see our fellow passengers on the Bombay steamer, I shall soon discover some ostensible reason why we two should be traveling through India with one of them." "Well, you are a witch, Hilda," I answered. "I found that out long ago. But if you succeed between here and Bombay in inventing a mission, I shall begin to believe you are even more of a witch than I ever thought you." At Aden we changed into a P&O steamer. Our first evening out on our second cruise was a beautiful one. The bland Indian Ocean wore its sweetest smile for us. We sat on deck after dinner. A lady with a husband came up from the cabin, while we sat and gazed at the placid sea. I was smoking a quiet, digestive cigar. Hilda was seated in her deck chair next to me. The lady with the husband looked about her for a vacant space on which to place the chair a steward was carrying for her. There was plenty of room on the quarterdeck. I could not imagine why she gazed about her with such obtrusive caution. She inspected the occupants of the various chairs around with deliberate scrutiny through a long handled tortoise shell optical abomination. None of them seemed to satisfy her. After a minute's effort, during which she also muttered a few words very low to her husband, she selected an empty spot midway between our group and the most distant group on the other side of us. In other words, she sat as far away from everybody present as the necessarily restricted area of the quarterdeck permitted. Hilda glanced at me and smiled. I snatched a quick look at the lady again. She was dressed with an amount of care and a smartness of detail that seemed somewhat uncalled for on the Indian Ocean. A cruise on a P&O steamer is not a garden party. Her chair was most luxurious, and had her name painted on it, back and front, in very large letters, with undue obtrusiveness. I read it from where I sat: Lady Meadowcroft. The owner of the chair was tolerably young, not bad looking, and most expensively attired. Her face had a certain vacant, languid, half ennuyé air which I have learned to associate with women of the nouveau riche type, women with small brains and restless minds, habitually plunged in a vortex of gaiety, and miserable when left for a passing moment to their own resources. Hilda rose from her chair and walked quietly forward towards the bow of the steamer. I rose too and accompanied her. "Well?" she said, with a faint touch of triumph in her voice when we had got out of earshot. "Well, what?" I answered, unsuspecting. "I told you everything turned up at the end," she said confidentially. "Look at the lady's nose." "It does turn up at the end, certainly," I answered, glancing back at her, "but I hardly see " "Hubert, you are growing dull. You were not so at Nathaniel's. It is the lady herself who has turned up, not her nose, though I grant you that turns up too. The lady I require for our tour in India, the not impossible chaperon." "Her nose tells you that?" "Her nose in part, but her face as a whole too, her dress, her chair, her mental attitude to things in general." "My dear Hilda, you can't mean to tell me you have divined her whole nature at a glance, by magic?" "Not wholly at a glance. I saw her come on board, you know. She transhipped from some other line at Aden, as we did, and I have been watching her ever since. Yes, I think I have unravelled her." "You have been astonishingly quick," I cried. "Perhaps, but then, you see, there is so little to unravel. Some books, we all know, you must chew and digest; they can only be read slowly, but some you can glance at, skim and skip. The mere turning of the pages tells you what little worth knowing there is in them." "She doesn't look profound," I admitted, casting an eye at her meaningless small features as we paced up and down. "I incline to agree you might easily skim her." "Skim her, and learn all. The table of contents is so short. You see, in the first place, she is extremely exclusive. She prides herself on her exclusiveness. It and her shoddy title are probably all she has to pride herself upon, and she works them both hard. She is a sham great lady." As Hilda spoke, Lady Meadowcroft raised a feebly querulous voice. "Steward, this won't do. I can smell the engine here. Move my chair. I must go on further." "If you go on further that way, my lady," the steward answered good humouredly, but with the manservant's deference for any sort of title, "you'll smell the galley, where they're cooking the dinner. I don't know which your ladyship would like best, the engine or the galley." The languid figure leaned back in the chair with an air of resignation. "I'm sure I don't know why they cook the dinners up so high," she murmured pettishly to her husband. "Why can't they stick the kitchens underground, in the hold, I mean, instead of bothering us up here on deck with them?" The husband was a big, burly, rough and ready Yorkshireman, stout, somewhat pompous, about 40, with hair wearing bald on the forehead, the personification of the successful business man. "My dear Emmy," he said in a loud voice with a North Country accent, "the cooks have got to live. They've got to live like the rest of us. I can never persuade you that the hands must always be humoured. If you don't humour them, they won't work for you. It's a poor tale when the hands won't work. Even with galleys on deck, the life of a sea cook is not generally thought an enviable position. It's not a happy one, not a happy one, as the fellow says in the opera. You must humour your cooks. If you stuck 'em in the hold, you'd get no dinner at all. That's the long and short of it." The languid lady turned away with a sickly, disappointed air. "Then they ought to have a conscription or something," she said, pouting her lips. "The government ought to take it in hand and manage it somehow. It's bad enough having to go by these beastly steamers to India at all, without having one's breath poisoned by " The rest of the sentence died away inaudibly in a general murmur of ineffective grumbling. "Why do you think she is exclusive?" I asked Hilda as we strolled on towards the stern, out of the spoiled child's hearing. "Why, didn't you notice? She looked about her when she came on deck to see whether there was anybody who was anybody sitting there, whom she might put her chair near. But the Governor of Madras hadn't come up from his cabin yet, and the wife of the Chief Commissioner of Oude had 3 civilians hanging about her seat, and the daughters of the commander in chief drew their skirts away as she passed. So she did the next best thing, sat as far apart as she could from the common herd, meaning all the rest of us. If you can't mingle at once with the best people, you can at least assert your exclusiveness negatively, by declining to associate with the mere multitude. Now, Hilda, that is the first time I have ever known you to show any feminine ill nature. Ill nature? Not at all. I am merely trying to arrive at the lady's character for my own guidance. I rather like her, poor little thing. Don't I tell you she will do? So far from objecting to her, I mean to go the round of India with her." "You have decided quickly." "Well, you see, if you insist upon accompanying me, I must have a chaperon, and Lady Meadowcraft will do as well as anybody else. In fact, being beladed, she will do a little better, from the point of view of society, though that is a detail. The great matter is to fix upon a possible chaperon at once, and get her well in hand before we arrive at Bombay." "But she seems so complaining," I interposed. "I'm afraid if you take her on, you'll get terribly bored with her." "If she takes me on, you mean? She's not a lady's maid, though I intend to go with her. And she may as well give in first as last, for I'm going. Now see how nice I am to you, sir. I've provided you, too, with a post in her suite, as you will come with me. No, never mind asking me what it is just yet. All things come to him who waits, and if you will only accept the post of waiter, I mean all things to come to you." "All things, Hilda?" I asked meaningly, with a little tremor of delight. She looked at me with a sudden passing tenderness in her eyes. "Yes, all things, Hubert, all things. But we mustn't talk of that, though I begin to see my way clearer now. You shall be rewarded for your constancy at last, dear knight errant. As to my chaperon, I am not afraid of her boring me. She bores herself, poor lady. One can see that, just to look at her. But she will be much less bored if she has us two to travel with. What she needs is constant companionship, bright talk, excitement. She has come away from London, where she swims with a crowd. She has no resources of her own, no work, no head, no interests. Accustomed to a whirl of foolish gaieties, she wearies her small brain, thrown back upon herself. She bores herself at once, because she has nothing interesting to tell herself. She absolutely requires somebody else to interest her. She can't even amuse herself with a book for 3 minutes together. See, she has a yellow backed French novel now, and she is only able to read 5 lines at a time. Then she gets tired and glances about her listlessly. What she wants is someone gay laid on to divert her all the time from her own inanity." "Hilda, how wonderfully quick you are at reading these things! I see you are right, but I could never have guessed so much myself from such small premises." "Well, what can you expect, my dear boy? A girl like this, brought up in a country rectory, a girl of no intellect, busy at home with the fowls and the pastry and the mothers' meetings, suddenly married offhand to a wealthy man, and deprived of the occupations which were her salvation in life, to be plunged into the whirl of a London season, and stranded at its end for want of the diversions, which by dint of use have become necessaries of life to her." "Now, Hilda, you are practising upon my credulity. You can't possibly tell from her look that she was brought up in a country rectory." "Of course not. You forget. There my memories comes in. I simply remember it." "You remember it? How?" "Why, just in the same way as I remembered your name and your mother's when I was first introduced to you. I saw a notice once in the births, deaths, and marriages at St. Alphege's, Millington, by the Reverend Hugh Clitheroe, M.A., father of the bride, Peter Gubbins, Esquire, of the Laurel Middletons, to Emilia Frances, third daughter of the Reverend Hugh Clitheroe, rector of Millington." Clitheroe Gubbins, what on earth has that to do with it? That would be Mrs. Gubbins. This is Lady Meadowcroft." "The same article, as the shopmen say, only under a different name. A year or two later I read a notice in the Times that I, Ivor de Courcy Meadowcroft, of the Laurels, Middleston, Mayor elect of the borough of Middleston, hereby give notice that I have this day discontinued the use of the name Peter Gubbins, by which I was formerly known, and have assumed in lieu thereof the style and title of Ivor de Courcy Meadowcroft, by which I desire in future to be known. A month or two later again I happened to light upon a notice in the Telegraph that the Prince of Wales had opened a new hospital for incurables at Middleston, and that the Mayor, Mr. Ivor Meadowcroft, had received an intimation of Her Majesty's intention of conferring upon him the honour of knighthood. Now, what do you make of it?" "Putting two and two together," I answered, with my eye on our subject, and taking into consideration the lady's face and manner, "I should incline to suspect that she was the daughter of a poor parson, with the usual large family in inverse proportion to his means; that she unexpectedly made a good match with a very wealthy manufacturer who had raised himself, and that she was puffed up accordingly with a sense of self importance." "Exactly. He is a millionaire, or something very like it, and being an ambitious girl, as she understands ambition, she got him to stand for the mayoralty. I don't doubt, in the year when the Prince of Wales was going to open the Royal Incurables, on purpose to secure him the chance of a knighthood. Then she said, very reasonably, 'I won't be Lady Gubbins, Sir Peter Gubbins. There's an aristocratic name for you,' and by a stroke of his pen he straightway disgubbinized himself, and emerged as Sir Ivor de Courcy Meadowcroft." "Really, Hilda, you know everything about everybody. And what do you suppose they're going to India for?" "Now you've asked me a hard one. I haven't the faintest notion. And yet, let me think. How is this for a conjecture? Sir Ivor is interested in steel rails, I believe, and in railway plant generally. I'm almost sure I've seen his name in connection with steel rails in reports of public meetings. There's a new government railway now being built on the Nepaul frontier, one of these strategic railways, I think they call them. It's mentioned in the papers we got at Aden. He might be going out for that. We can watch his conversation and see what part of India he talks about." "They don't seem inclined to give us much chance of talking," I objected. "No, they are very exclusive. But I'm very exclusive too, and I mean to give them a touch of my exclusiveness. I venture to predict that before we reach Bombay they'll be going down on their knees and imploring us to travel with them." At table, as it happened, from next morning's breakfast, the Meadowcrofts sat next to us. Hilda was on one side of me, Lady Meadowcroft on the other, and beyond her again, bluff Yorkshire Sir Ivor, with his cold, hard, honest blue North Country eyes, and his dignified, pompous English, breaking down at times into a North Country colloquialism. They talked chiefly to each other. Acting on Hilda's instructions, I took care not to engage in conversation with our exclusive neighbour, except so far as the absolute necessities of the table compelled me. I troubled her for the salt in the most frigid voice. "May I pass you the potato salad?" became on my lips a barrier of separation. Lady Meadowcroft marked and wondered. People of her sort are so anxious to ingratiate themselves with all the best people, that if they find you are fully unconcerned about the privilege of conversation with a titled person, they instantly judge you to be a distinguished character. As the days rolled on, Lady Meadowcroft's voice began to melt by degrees. Once she asked me, quite civilly, to send round the ice. She even saluted me on the third day out with a polite "Good morning, doctor." Still I maintained, by Hilda's advice, my dignified reserve, and took my seat severely, with a cold "Good morning." I behaved like a high class consultant, who expects to be made physician in ordinary to Her Majesty. End of Chapter 9, Part 1. Read by Lars Rolander.